Hello, hello, hello. I'm back again after I think it's been about an exact week since my last video. I don't even really have an excuse, but I'm gonna I'm gonna do my best. Put out videos, no guarantees though. Today I'm just gonna get right into it. We're gonna be reading Why Be a Common Sense Realist by someone with the last name Devitt. Not entirely sure of his first name. Not at all sure. But anyways, let's just get into it. Dare I suggest that at last a kind of high-mindedness and sportsmanship have conspired against the vulgar plethora of the evidence for realism to protect from Bathos, the persistent problems and the laborious ritual of our profession. To bring such gross implements as Mill's methods to the limpid regions of philosophic discourse is like dynamiting a trout stream. It gets the fish, but it misses all the exquisite, impractical pleasure of angling with a thin line of dialectic. Besides, it depletes the game supply. These punctilios may, of course, mean simply a resolve that philosophy must be critical of the most obvious of mundane opinions and methods. But so far as they are a mode of gratuitous superiority, the philosopher who does not think of philosophy as mere courtly pastime, like Parcheesi, will abandon them. The disclaimer of the earthier sorts of knowledge has isolated philosophy, made it a mystery or a jest, an escape from reality or a visionary interpretation. Philosophy is not a higher or super scientific. It is the lowest and grubbiest inquiry around the roots of things, and when it answers real questions about the world, it is and can only be an inductive science. It's a quotation from Williams in 1966. Now on to the reading. 5.1 Introduction. Realism is about the ordinary observable physical world in a compelling doctrine. It is almost universally held outside philosophical circles. From an early age, we come to believe that such objects as stones, cats, and trees exist. Further, we believe that these objects exist even when we are not perceiving them, and that they do not depend for their existence on our opinions, nor on anything mental. These beliefs about ordinary objects are central to our whole way of viewing the world, to our conceptual scheme. The doctrine I have defined to capture these beliefs is aptly named common sense realism, because it is in fact the core of common sense. It does not follow from this common sense realism which I shall often in this chapter simply call realism, should be accepted uncritically. However, it does follow that we should only give it up in the face of a very convincing argument against it, and for an alternative. So the main argument for realism will be that the arguments against it and for alternatives fail. I think that Popper is not far wrong in claiming that no sensible alternative has ever been offered. I do offer a positive argument for realism. It requires that epistemology be naturalized. Finally, I shall reject the view that scientific realism undermines common sense realism. The elements in my argument are mostly not novel, though there is perhaps some novelty in the ways they are arranged. It seems necessary to rehearse the familiar strengths of realism in order to make the part 3 rejection of contemporary anti-realist tendencies persuasive. In Chapter 6, I shall argue I've been reading a lot of philosophy. Recently, I started The Republic. Just finished book 2 earlier today. Philosophy readings are slow and draining. But we're getting through it. The elements in my argument are mostly not novel. Wait. In Chapter 6, I shall argue for correspondence truth, physical from a realist perspective. That argument is good. It provides further support for realism, for it shows how realism is a part of a plausible explanation for a wide range of linguistic and non-linguistic behavior. In Chapter 7, I shall argue for scientific realism. 5.2 Cartesian Skepticism. Perhaps the most famous argument against realism is that advanced by Descartes in the First Meditation. It is tempting to construe that Cartesian skepticism in ways that make it easy. It is tempting to construe such Cartesian skepticism in ways that make it easy to dismiss. 1. The skeptic is seen as requiring absolute certainty, the absence of any possibility of error, before we can be said to have knowledge. Such a standard for knowledge seems unreasonably high. 2. The skeptic is seen as offering reasons for doubting that we know anything, but if these reasons are to carry any weight, then they must be propositions we claim to know, so skepticism is self-defeating. These temptations should be resisted, because they seriously underestimate the power of the skeptical argument. Concerning 1, the skeptic does not have to tie knowledge to absolute certainty. Indeed, he does not have to talk of knowledge at all. He can make his case talking only of justified or rational belief. Concerning 2, the skeptic need not make any knowledge or belief claims. He asks the realist to justify his position and uses assumptions that the realist seems in no position to deny to show that these attempted justifications fail. The skeptic himself is dubious of these assumptions, as of almost everything else. The argument, therefore, is something of a reductio of realism. The realist perspective itself shows realism to be unjustified. The skeptical strategy is to insist that realism is justified in his belief only if he can give good reasons for eliminating alternative hypotheses to realism. I really am yawning a lot. Yet, the skeptic argues the realist is unable to give such reasons, as he, the realist, should be able to see. Realism collapses from within. If we have knowledge or justified belief of the external world, it is obvious that we acquire that knowledge or belief through our sensory experiences. Yet how can we rely on these? Descartes asks. First, the realist must allow that our senses sometimes deceive us. There are familiar examples of illusions and hallucination. How then can we ever be justified in relying on our senses? Second, how can we be sure that we are not dreaming? Though we think we are perceiving the external world, perhaps we are only dreaming we are. Finally, perhaps there is a deceitful demon, causing us to have sensory experiences as if of an external world, when in fact there's no world. I've mentioned this before on the channel. All-time theory right there. There's a gremlin in my brain. Maybe the gremlin is my brain. Maybe I'm the gremlin. If we do not know that this is not the case, how can we know that realism is correct? How can it even be rational to believe realism? This Cartesian doubt reflects the truth of underdetermination. The evidence of our senses underdetermines our opinions of the world. Other opinions are compatible with the evidence. This truth is supported by our best modern science. Consider our scientific account of the mechanics of perception. According to this account, when a person sees an object, roughly, the following occurs. Light waves reflected from the object are focused onto the retina in each of the person's eyes. They cause chemical changes, which in turn cause electrical impulses to pass along nerve fibers to the visual areas of the brain. As a result, the person may come to believe that the object is before him. Precisely which series of nerves fire, and precisely which belief is formed, depends not only on the nature of the stimulation, but also on various aspects of the person's physiological and psychological state, including his expectations. These expectations depend on the theories of the world he has built up over many years, as a result of many earlier experiences. What we see and what we come to believe, following stimulation, is partly a result of, largely unconscious, processing. To a degree, we impose a view, perceiving what we expect to perceive. The mere fact that a person, as a result of a perceptual experience, comes to believe that a certain object is in front of him, does not establish that it is in front of him. It is compatible with our theory of perception that he should not come to this belief, and yet there be no such object in front of him. It is compatible with that theory that he should come to beliefs about the external world as a result of perceptual experiences, and yet there be no such world at all. First, the stimulation that the person received is not necessary for him to have come to the belief. Other stimulation, perhaps having nothing to do with the object in question, could bring about a similar series of nerve firings and the same belief. He could impose the same view on the consequences of different stimulations. Secondly, the existence of the object is not necessary for the particular stimulation that led to the belief. The stimulation consisted in a certain pattern of light falling on his retina. Anything that produces that would do so. Anything that produces that would do as well. The object is only one of many things that could do so. The position can be put more extremely. Were the realist now brain in a vat, appropriately stimulated for years on end by the modern equivalent of Descartes' deceitful demon, super scientist, he would have the same view of the world that he now has. He would find the idea that he was a brain in a vat just as fantastic and impossible to imagine as he now finds it. On what ground does the realist rule this possibility out? As a result of an enormously complicated series of happenings in his nervous system, he comes to have a certain view of the world, but these happenings are compatible with other hypotheses. On what ground do we rule out these hypotheses? It seems that the realist cannot know that there is an external world, and the problem is not merely that he lacks certainty about it. It seems that his belief in it is unjustified. I hope that wasn't loud. A realist is in no position to deny the findings of our best science. Indeed, it is largely the explanatory success of the science that gives him his great confidence in realism. Yet this realist science includes a theory of perception that seems to show that realism is unjustified, for it shows that we have no evidence favoring realism over other hypotheses. Part of our realist worldview shows that realism is unjustified. There are four basic ways of reacting to this. 1. The traditional way, adopted by Descartes himself, accepts the skeptical problematic, but seeks an area of knowledge, but is not open to skeptical doubt, and which can serve as a foundation for all or most claims to knowledge. Since even the most basic common sense knowledge, that of the existence of the external world, is open to doubt, as we have seen, the search is for a special philosophic realm of knowledge. This has been found in knowledge of ideas, or sense data. I shall consider these foundations in section 5.3. Some philosophers have attempted to build a realist position on these foundations. I shall consider such attempts in section 5.4. However, it has seemed to most foundationalists that the way to save our knowledge was to give up the realist ontology. I shall consider an anti-realist foundationalism in section 5.5. 2. The Kantian reaction might be regarded as some sort of foundationalism. However, it is very different from one, and so I shall treat it separately. It takes skepticism very seriously, but it does not find an answer in knowledge of sense data. It claims that the familiar external world is partly constituted by us, and so is knowable. Consider it first in section 5.6, returning to it in sections 9.2 and 11.5. Another way of reacting would be to accept the argument and adopt skepticism. The problem with this reaction is that it leaves us so little. If Cartesian doubt undermines knowledge, justified belief, claims anywhere it will undermine them almost everywhere. Skepticism that starts with physical objects soon spreads to other minds, and then to one's own mind at other times. A person is left, at most, with the belief that he is now experiencing. He can believe only in the world of drastic simplicity, that of solipsism of the moment, or instantaneous solipsism. A story of Russell's brings out that solipsism is literally incredible. I once received a letter from an eminent logician, Miss Christine Ladd Franklin, saying that she was a solipsist, and was surprised that there were not others. Finally, there is a way of reacting to the problem that reflects the influence of W.V. Quine. It rejects the skeptical, problematic, and a priori epistemology altogether. It does not drop the claims of folk theory and science in the face of a skeptical epistemology. Rather, it starts from those claims, including the posits on which realism is based, and seeks an epistemology from within science. This leads to a less demanding sort of justification than that required by the skeptic. It leads to a naturalized epistemology. From this perspective, skepticism is seen as a consistent position, which is, ultimately, unanswerable. Our beliefs are underdetermined by the evidence. We could be wrong about anything, yet we hold to our beliefs, rejecting other hypotheses against which we have no evidence. We are confident that the skeptic who refuses to follow us in this will have a short life, but in the end, we find ourselves with no argument to convince him. Extreme skepticism is simply uninteresting. Instantaneous solipsism, the brain and the vat hypothesis, and other such fantasies are too implausible to take seriously. This reaction is in accord with Maxim 3, and is the one I favor in sections 5.7 to 5.9. We're going to call it there. But I think I'm going to record another video doing some more of this reading. Probably not finishing it, though, because it takes... Those 5 pages took 16 minutes. But I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.